All right. Howdy, everybody. Welcome to this week's workshop talking all about working in broadcast. It's a really exciting field and one that people don't often talk about. It's not the most flashy, forward facing thing where we see a lot of headlines about content creators and esports teams and all these big investments. Not a lot of headlines these days about the people behind the scenes who make everything work. And it's one of the essential pillars of what makes gaming and esports succeed. And we felt it important to talk a bit about today. And we have some experts to share some knowledge with us towards the end as we get along, where you guys can ask questions and pick their brain about all the stuff you want to know that comes from casting or working on the back end of running a broadcast from the technical side. But before that, we're just going to kind of do a cursory overview of different roles, tools, options, and give you an idea of what working in broadcast kind of looks like. So let's talk a bit about it. Like I said, it's not the most discussed part of the gaming industry, but it's by far one of the most essential parts. These broadcast teams are key to putting on your favorite events like E3, the Game Awards, any of the esports leagues you watch. Some of the shows content creators do, they'll even have teams behind the scenes helping them do it if they're a big streamer. But as you see at the bottom, there's a bunch of places that these broadcast skills can be used, even outside of gaming, like putting on things like conferences or working in sports and news, for example. These skills are very applicable across a wide variety of places, but right now, super essential to the growth of gaming and esports. And the nice part is you don't have to go get experience in a real news studio to learn these things. All you have to do is download OBS on your laptop and you can start learning a bit about how this stuff works. So keep a keen eye on this space. If it intrigues you, make sure to pick some of these skills up because the future of broadcast is big. More money is coming into gaming than ever. It's going to keep growing as we figure out how this industry needs to proceed. And broadcast teams are going to be carrying the shows that take it all the way where it needs to go. So, we've talked about this a bit previously, but let's do an overview of the key roles that really go into putting on a show. There's the ones that you almost never hear about, the observers. They are the in game camera. That's what gets you all the shots of overhead from the team fights or coming in with the rollout when a match starts. All of these great shots and moments that really capture the hype of the game or the POVs of key kills. Those are the observers behind the scenes, making sure that you don't miss a moment. The casters are super important. We have our resident pro here, Ashcon, who can talk a bit about this later, but they're the ones telling the story, giving you the play by play, building that narrative, and really bringing everyone along for the ride, and especially contextualizing things for people who might not actually know what's going on yet. Casters are super important in making esports accessible and enjoyable for experts and newbies alike. The tech director is essential. We have a lot of experience in the room with Sam and Liam here who've done that a good few times, and they're basically running the show. They make sure everything is where it needs to be on time and goes out as the way it needs to. They are the captain of the ship. What the TD says goes, and they make sure that they're putting on a good show. Then you obviously have your producer. They kind of come in with the creative lead, make sure the shots are taken care of, and there's that live operation side with the creative direction the show is handled. You have your graphics, so all of the overlays and the score pop-ups and the graphics that pop up between matches, the little sponsor integrations, all of these visual elements that pop up that aren't naturally in the game come from the graphics team. The folks making them and then executing them live are super important. The host, obviously, we all know every good show has to have a host. They might not be there during the play by play, but in between matches, they carry the story, they interview players, and they keep the crowd online and in person engaged, excited, and really invested in what they're watching. Now, the replay operators, One of the most important. Once again, not a lot of people talk about them. You think these replays just happen, but they don't. There's someone behind the scenes collecting these moments, putting together highlight reels live as the game proceeds, or even prepping them to cut to right away. Just like if something crazy happened, they got to jump back to it for anyone who might have missed it, and they have to have those replays ready. Super important parts of broadcast that don't get quite enough praise sometimes. And then lastly, the analysts as well. These are the experts on the game. They know everything and anything about the players, the teams, the league, and are able to break down the technical side and really talk about the strats and the elements that came to fruition during each game. So let's dive into tech directors specifically. One of the key roles, obviously, like we said, captain of the ship. They're super important in terms of operating the video switcher, selecting the camera angles and the gameplay feeds that get shown. So if they know that you need to jump from this player to this player over here because someone else is about to try and capture a point, that's the TD making those calls and making sure that you guys see everything you need to see. The visual flow of that broadcast is super important. Additionally, timing and pacing, really important. Something you don't necessarily think about, but making sure that you follow the flow of the game properly and you follow all the key moments that need covered, depending on the type of game, can be really, really impactful. Games like Rocket League, everything's kind of in a compact arena and there's not quite as much concern there as long as you're hitting the angles. But talking about something like League or Overwatch or games that might be a bit more spread out where there's different fights or different objectives in various areas, that timing and pacing becomes really important. And then they also coordinate the visuals with the graphics and making sure those lower thirds, the sponsor integrations, the bracket, the scores, all that stuff shows up properly, accurately, and on time. Tech directors are super important. It takes a bit of experience to get used to because you have to pull together all these different elements and work with a big team all at once. But people who can do it effectively are really, really crucial and make for a great show. Sam on our team here, we think, does an amazing job when he gets to be the tech director in particular. Now, observers we talked a bit about, they're that in-game camera. They make sure that everything you need to see, you get to see. One of the hardest parts actually is running the camera itself. It looks super smooth and you don't always think about how it happens, but they often do this on a controller because it's much easier to create those fluid, smooth movements than if you're on a keyboard doing WASD. So learning to actually flow the camera around, capture the right moment, jump between POVs and overhead shots, it takes some serious skill. Good observers should not be underrated. They are essential to capturing the right moments and making sure that fans see what they need to see. I've watched plenty of esports broadcasts where the people in Twitch chat get up in arms because crazy engagement, double kill, triple kill, whatever retake happened, and they didn't catch it because the observer missed that moment. And if you miss it, it's gone. So this role is so, so important, not just to the fan viewer experience, but also supporting the casters here at the bottom, making sure that what's showing up on the screen aligns with what the casters are talking about and supports them in telling the story of what's happening throughout the round. If the camera's watching someone and the caster's talking about someone totally different on the opposite side of the map, it feels weird. So making sure those two are in sync is really, really important. Additionally, front facing, very important casters. They give you your play by play, they bring the hype, they bring the commentary, they talk about what's happening in the game, but they don't just talk about it, but they really make it come alive. We've seen these games before. Folks who watch an esports league have probably played the game for dozens of hours. They know exactly what's happening. You don't need the explanation, but these casters are there to bring the game to life. They bring the energy, they bring the hype, and they really add to the experience in a way that's completely necessary. Ashkan's gonna be able to talk a bit about that soon, and that storytelling element is just so crucial, especially for people who might not have watched a lot of esports and you don't already know all the teams, all the players, and how the maps work. Casters are really crucial for the growth of esports because when you bring someone new to watch an esports broadcast and they don't know what's going on, that voice explaining what's happening and contextualizing and shouting out what's going on can make a world of difference. And then they're also able to bring some of that analysis and insight as they cover the game, talk about some of the individual player performances, highlight the plays, key contributions, and really talk a bit about how what happened came to be. Now, next, we're going to talk a bit about some of the broadcast software. You might have heard of some of these. It varies from very basic and accessible to stuff I learned about 3 months ago because broadcast gets crazy. But there's a lot of levels of complexity from putting on a Twitch stream in your bedroom to working out of the crazy fancy striker facilities that Riot's building out, you know? So what we're talking about here is broadcast software. It can be as simple as OBS Studio or XSplit. Those are relatively approachable. I've messed around in OBS. You can download it for free, tweak it, mess with it, try to run your own broadcast. Then you can also go up to more professional programs like vMix or Wirecast, which also can bring a lot to the table in terms of capabilities. Graphics and overlays, those are often made in Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects. You probably heard of these programs. That Adobe suite is so important to broadcasting, and all those assets come out of that place generally. but then they're brought to life through programs like Expression, which help you place them, switch between them, and integrate them into the broadcast. It's one thing to make them, it's another thing to actually make it a part of the show. Then when it comes to replays, the also important thing we talked about, you got tools like EVS or NewTek. They make sure that you're able to kind of rewind the tape, capture what you need, and make it usable moving forward. So let's talk a little bit about hardware because software is not going to run without the right thing to use it. So, much like the software, it really can vary from super simple to really complex. But generally, if you're running a large scale show, you need some serious tech. Um, and it comes from the form of servers, switchers, and capture systems. A lot of the times, you can use tools like the Blackmagic ATEM series. We've worked with some of those on our shows. I know Sam has experience with those, and those kind of bring in the gameplay feeds, the graphics overlays. Switchers are crucial because they take all the different threads like graphics, music, gameplay, overlays, all these things and brings them together in one place so you can work with them and coordinate them all in one spot. It's really, really important. Then obviously you have your capture systems like an Elgato or a Blackmagic. This is how you take the gameplay and send it to the hub where you're running your show. That hardware becomes more and more important as your show gets bigger and bigger. You can see a picture there on the bottom. That's the Halo event we worked on in Salt Lake City for the HCS Global Invitational. We had I think 3 or 4 separate stages and matches going on simultaneously, and then you have to be able to capture the gameplay from each of those, the audio, put the overlays in, and all of those had to function at the same time. So all of this hardware has to work in tandem, and you gotta be able to understand what goes where and how best to use it. So, there's a lot of opportunities to get out there. Liam, if your mic is working, I'll allow you to chat a bit about this, but if you're not good to go, I can run with it.
Let's have you run with it, and then I'll
Okay.
probably add my 2 cents afterwards.
Let's do that then. So, the first place to do stuff like this is a lot of school oriented opportunities. Programs like Kengarf Esports is a great way to get involved. They're providing so much opportunity for you guys just to get touch points with these things, talk to people who worked in that space. And as you potentially look at going into college, there's even more opportunities. I actually got to work on a broadcast the first time ever at the University of Utah when I was a student, back when Sam here on our team was doing college esports and needed help. And me and a bunch of students volunteered, and I got to help direct the Overwatch broadcasts. It was scary and it was stressful, but it was also really cool, and I learned a lot. And those opportunities are going to be all around you if you're looking for them, and it's a really, really great way just to get some hands-on experience and understand what you're working with. So if you do get to the professional environment, you're the person who's not going to need as much training, and you're able to just jump right in. Things like internships also very, very useful. Once you have a little bit of experience from stuff like these school opportunities or student clubs, you're able to go out there and do real work. And there's always people looking for more help when it comes to broadcasts. There is an infinite amount of things that these shows need help with, and if you're able to step in and support it, and if you're especially able to make it shine and do a really good job, you're going to become a very valuable person who will find a good line of work. And then lastly, don't be afraid to experiment. You could skip all of this and just learn how to stream from your bedroom if you want and make your own graphics and put together little transitions and make something in OBS that feels personal to you, and you can create your own content, and that's just as valid. I know I've streamed on Twitch personally. It was really fun for me getting to learn how to use OBS, put my graphics in, make the different scenes and transition between them and make a show. It wasn't the complex type of stuff you see at VCT or in Call of Duty League or stuff like that, but it's valid experience. So if you don't have opportunities for clubs or internships around you and you do want to learn this stuff, download OBS, learn how to run your own stream, learn how to make your own graphics. It might seem like a lot of work, but sometimes when you get into it, it becomes really fun. So don't shy away from all the opportunities you have in front of you to learn some of these skills and find a new way to potentially do really cool work in esports. So that concludes the presentation portion of this. What we're going to do next is we're going to jump right into our Q&A and talk to some of our experts here. I have a couple questions for our friends Liam and Ashkan here, and we're just going to chat with them. And then you guys can actually ask your own questions if you would like. You're welcome to throw your thoughts at them, ask for advice, whatever it is that sounds good to you. Ashkan, Liam, you guys ready to answer some questions?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Hello, hello.
Oh, we've even got him on the camera. Look at this guy. Good to see you again, man. I haven't seen you in a minute. How are you?
Good to see you as well. I'm doing good. Doing good. Just came off of some university classes, so feeling all right.
A shining example of how to make your way through the education system and also get experience in esports. Hell yeah. All right. So I will let you start and then I'll let Liam answer after you, Ashkan. But could each of you please tell us just a bit about your experience working in broadcast and some of the work that you've done in your time doing it?
Yeah, so the main thing that I do is casting. Work as a freelance shoutcaster for a variety of different games. I like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Rocket League, Valorant. I've done a little bit of Counter Strike, Apex Legends, and pretty much anything that people have asked of me, I will end up trying to learn. Like I've done even a couple of Minecraft or Fall Guy shows. So anything that most any games, a lot of studying, and then I've also worked as a tournament admin behind the scenes as well, which I don't know if we talked about that as much.
Not as much. Actually, that's an important one we glossed a bit over because it falls in that weird place where it's broadcast, but it's also ops and like tournament operations. So what he's referring to is the TAs that you guys have probably encountered when you participate in a tournament. They just make sure everyone's where they need to be, handle disputes, stuff like that. Also incredibly important. But yeah, that's awesome. Liam, how about you, man?
Yeah, my name is Liam Kennecker. I'm the current director of broadcast and events at Airlock and SSG. I've been doing broadcasts and events for 6, 7 years now. I got my start in collegiate as well. It started as me kind of curious about the space and wanting to make something for myself. So I just started by volunteering my time to help some people make some cool collegiate leagues, and from there it grew into honestly more than I could ever dream. Um, I tend to work more on the back end of things for broadcasts. So unlike Ashcon, who is quite literally the face of the broadcast at times, I'm very much behind the scenes. I like to focus on creating, run a show, finding staff. We work a lot with freelancers, so people like Ashcon. We pull into our projects and get them ready to put on these events with us. So I do a lot of the back end keeping of things. Probably some of my favorite events I've worked on include that Halo Championship Series event that Brendan mentioned with SSG. Um, and a long while ago now, we did an event for Offline TV. It was one of their first Valorant shows, and that one was really fun to get to work. A lot of moving parts in the background. So while it might not seem like someone behind the wizard behind the curtain does a lot, there's so much moving in the back of the broadcast that I've kind of found my way around broadcast without having to get super involved on the actual broadcast line.
That's awesome. And it sounds like we might get to ask Sam some questions too. But
Hello.
before I jump to him, Liam, would you mind briefly touching on what is so important about a run of show document? That's something I didn't get to talk about in this presentation, but it's probably something anyone watching this will have to touch at some point if they work in broadcast. Do you want to give a brief description of what a run of show is, what it's used for, and kind of the moving parts that go into it that make it so important?
Yeah, so we call them run of shows. Some people call them rundowns. Um, when we talk about technical directors and how they have to pace a broadcast and keep everything on schedule, they're using a document called a run of show. And that's a big old, sometimes it comes in the form of an Excel sheet. Sometimes people use proprietary software that track exactly where we are in the show. But there is usually some form of list slash rundown of all of the micro events that can happen in a broadcast. So on our run a show, we go down to the granularities of what the casters should be saying at certain times. So if we have an obligation to an event sponsor or some kind of talking point that we really need to hit in our broadcast, we will have a dedicated time for that. It tells you what time that it should start at, how long it should run for. And that's kind of like the master time tracker for technical directors and the broadcast crew to understand where we are. It bridges a lot of communication. So, observers can get a good idea of when they're going to be on gameplay. So when they need to be in lobby, when they're, actively collecting different camera shots and coordinating with each other to execute on the gameplay section of the run of show. Casters have a good idea of when they need to be speaking and what they're speaking about. The technical director knows exactly where we are in the show and can direct people as needed. So it's kind of that master tool that everyone uses to stay on track for a broadcast.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. Sometimes it even goes down to like minute by minute. If you're ever curious what graphic needs to be on stream, what sound should be playing, or who should be doing what, it is in that document. It is your blueprint to how to run the show. All you got to do is plug it in. So thankfully, we get to ask Sam questions because I love asking Sam questions. Would you mind telling us a bit about your experience with broadcast? I slightly alluded to some of it with the collegiate stuff. Yeah, if you want to talk a little bit about the work you've done.
Sure, yeah. I started out as a graphic designer way back when and just kind of made fun graphics. I started way back when in like my collegiate club, and I believe Angie picked me up and she's like, "This guy makes cool graphics. I can give him a leadership role and he'll be want to keep making graphics for me." So, made graphics for about 2-ish years or so from there, and then really kind of was getting like a CS degree in the background. Changed over to game dev eventually, but always kind of filled this role where I was managing people, but also doing some of the programming when I needed to, and also doing the graphics when I needed to, and kind of had this choice ahead of me with esports of like, I want to grow out of being a tournament admin. I want to grow out of that role and kind of create something bigger. And so I started to just tinker around with broadcast and really do a lot of cool stuff with it. I had the ability to do the graphics for it, I had the ability to program for it, I had the ability to manage the people for it. And thankfully Liam came on as we started to found our own company and basically came in and managed the people for me so I could focus on the graphics and the show. So it was a fantastic little journey that we were able to do, but my specialization was always tech directing. When you build the show, you kind of have a good feel of like what's going to go wrong or what's going to go right with it. You have this whole vision of how the show is going to be built from start to bottom, of like it's going to go starting soon. You basically build the rundown in your head already when you're just building the show, so you can set up all the triggers and all the programming to basically be like, yeah, all of this is automatically going to happen when I cut to this. We're going to fade out the music, we're going to bring in a replay. All that stuff just kind of pops into your head when you're building the show. And especially all the way down to when you're building the graphics of like, I want to place this here so that I can later come in here and basically take this logo that's on the left side of the screen, shift it so it goes out. I'm going to animate it like that, and then the music's going to play when that happens. There's a lot of stuff that when you have that like holistic view, it becomes more simple than when you're sharing a vision with other people. And that was always kind of my specialty of just getting it done. And being able to be that jack of all trades that was able to kind of just get it done. And the TDing side of that was basically just running that show once you had the rundown in your head and pushing forward with it. There's a lot of shot calling that gets involved with it too, but it's a really fun time. And now I'm more in charge of ops and sales for Airlock, so it's been a wild journey.
We have yet to find a problem Sam can't solve, but darn it, we're gonna find it one day.
Can't solve world hunger.
It's a tough
Not
one.
quite in esports. Not yet. But that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think if there's one thing you can glean from talking to the three of you guys, it's that you got to be comfortable in a live setting, making decisions on the fly, sticking to what's in your mind, and working with the team as best you can. And if you can't rely on the team around you, it's going to be really hard to do. Majestic in chat said, that's one of my goals too, to create a good community and bring people together who enjoy the same things as you. That's awesome. I mean, I can say firsthand, a lot of good work and career opportunities and development come from just being around people who share similar interests and passions. I met Sam at the University of Utah because I joined the gaming club on campus. I didn't know what else to do, and now we work together. It's just kind of how things go. It truly is like, 5 years down the road, you find someone again that you met through that similar interest. So definitely foster those things.
It helps that I stopped yelling at him as much.
Sometimes the yelling was motivational, but that's true.
You have to grow as a leader too, and that's the part that people never really like think through. Like especially when you're playing video games, like in League of Legends, like your shot caller has to grow too, and it's important to let them like mature on that level as well, and you like follow the call and go through with it, especially in a live event experience. It's a whole thing. So everyone matures and everyone grows at different rates. Hopefully you're all growing around the same rate and you all come in with similar expertise.
Yeah, you do your best. The next question I have for each of you guys, we can do the same order here, is when you knew that broadcast was a setting you actually wanted to work in, how did you kind of feel like this was a direction you wanted to run? Or maybe you didn't and you just kind of ended up here by accident and now you're doing it because you're already so deep that you can't pull out now. But I'm really curious, what led you guys to broadcast? What made you passionate about this space, and what I think keeps you coming back?
I think it was for me what triggered my, I guess, association with esports in general was the release of Valorant over the pandemic. Riot Games was like, surprise, we have this game ready for you like a year earlier than we said we would give it to you. And that really hyped me up. And I had always had this competitive spirit. And I tried to compete in Valorant. I actually snuck onto a university team to try to do that. It was a different university. That fell through as well. They found out I didn't go there. But I still wanted to stay attached. And one of the collegiate leagues that university was competing in needed casters, and so that's when I stepped in. And previously, I had also coached other traditional sports like tennis and karate. So getting onto the stage or getting in front of people worked for me. I just had to
Yeah.
change that skill set into something for a live broadcast. And after doing it a couple of times, I realized, okay, I am very much enjoying breaking things down for people because I'm more of an analytical mind, I would say. And getting to throw those things out there and having people able to understand whatever's going on in the highly competitive scene made me feel really rewarded. And that's what keeps me coming back.
That's a great answer. Lesson learned, kids. Sneak onto teams and lie your way onto things. You'll,
Okay,
you'll
well,
find your way where
no.
you want to go. No, I kid. Don't lie to people. But sometimes you take creative strategies to find where you get to go. So I think that's a wild story, and it's a good example of sometimes where you think you're ending up is going to lead you to something else that you might not have anticipated, and that's a good thing to embrace. Liam, you're next, bud. What brought you here? What makes you love broadcast so
Yeah.
much?
I think I definitely fall into this wasn't the plan, but this is how it played out
Yeah,
boat.
it's good. Yeah.
When I initially first started my esports journey, I was a tournament admin for a couple of collegiate leagues. I had first started with collegiate PUBG, and then quickly transitioned over to basically a co-founder of collegiate Rainbow Six. And my responsibilities there, I was the tournament and the community lead. So a little bit of a double-edged sword. My passion had always been doing cool things and connecting with cool people, so it worked out well. But I think through the process of all that, you kind of realize that there's more out there. And as I got closer with Sam and we started working more intimately together, and even founded our own company, there was so many more layers to everything that you kind of have to put yourself in a position to apply the skills that you've built up elsewhere. And for me, that came in the form of still connecting with cool people, but connecting with cool people in the capacity of helping us put on cool things. So as we started our company, Space Productions, I fell into a role that was very much supportive of all of our operations, finding the people that we needed and kind of carving our internal culture and that kind of stuff with our company. And that, I would say, is not necessarily a broadcast endemic role, right? That's something that's very operations, but when you work so closely with broadcast, you kind of get sucked into it. Broadcast is, especially in esports and gaming, is so intensive that you really can't work anywhere in a company that's doing esports events and broadcasts without getting pretty intimately involved into it. And I think as I started to realize how cool the things were that we were doing, it really made me fall in love with it. So it's definitely not like I don't like where I am now. It was, I didn't see myself here, but damn, is it really cool to be here. We got to work with so many
Good
cool
way to put
people,
it.
put on so many cool experiences. And I think for me, seeing those comments of like, dang, this is cool, I really enjoyed this, or any kind of like small improvement to people's lives, experiences, whatever it may be, seeing those comments kind of turned it into a love of mine. I got more involved in projects and kind of went from there.
That's a really good answer. I definitely echo that in the way of I never intended to end up in broadcast or events. I went from being a community manager at Space Station Gaming and working on fun fan initiatives and stuff to put together some events, and here we are running a full-on event and production company thanks to the help of you guys. So well put. I love that answer. Sam, how about you, man? The broadcast wizard.
Ooh, so I had a little bit more of a business acumen behind it. Like, it was cool and it was fine and dandy, and it was like the next step in my evolution of like being a part of esports. But I really had that like crisis of faith probably when I was about like 23, 24, an early life crisis of basically like, okay, how do I want to make sure this career is stable? Because there's a lot of esports that is not stable. It's kind of chaotic and terrifying, and during downturns like we're seeing now, it's a little scary. So I really sat back and I was like, where is the money in esports? Like, who is getting paid no matter what happens? They are getting paid for their services. And I sat there and I was like, it's not the teams. The teams rely on mostly sponsors and sometimes get paychecks from like the publishers, but that's about it. It's not like these kind of third party contractors. And I chose very early on that I did not want to live that like 1099 life anymore. I wanted to make sure that I was almost always a salary man so that I could stick to that kind of like way of life of making sure that I have a stable foundation to build my life on. And so I really kind of started to, I say this as we literally founded a startup and I didn't get paid for a year and a half. So, you know, it's give and take. But from there, it basically turned into these events people are almost always getting paid. And it's like, yeah, sure, this was before COVID. And I was like, the events will never stop happening. And then, boom, COVID happened. So I just focused mostly on like building out events and kind of focusing on a lot of those skills that I had. And I always say that I had a triangle of expertise that I absolutely love. At the top, it's like managing people. At the other side, it's like graphics. And on the other side, it's like programming and ops. And I've always had a really good, keen eye for like being able to find efficiencies in things and kind of have that scope of building things from the inside out. And candidly, I've always loved working under huge amounts of pressure. That is not something you hear from most people, but like if any of you guys are like neurospicy out there or like neurodivergent in any way, if you have ADHD, holy cow, broadcast is for you, man. Like you will constantly be stimulated. It is wild. You have like 3 voices going in your ear. You got the music going on. You got the comms in your ear. You got 3 other screens that you have to be watching. You have to make sure the camera's in focus. You have to see the next thing. You will never have a lack of attention for or a lack of like stimulus of attention for something. It will always be there. And that kind of just the incredible energy that you get in a broadcast environment, the best thing I can find is like it's basically a sports team where you don't leave your chair. It's this feeling of like absolute camaraderie that you built and you put on the best show possible, and you guys killed it together in this crazy live environment, and the world's against you, and Twitch is crashing and everything's going wrong, but you know what? You guys did it together, and that's what matters. And that's the real reason on why I stay now, is the teamwork and the operational side of it. It's just unparalleled, and I absolutely adore it and love it.
That was a banger answer. I forgot the slide about if you have ADHD, you should work in broadcast. That's very well put. But I think that was a really good recap. It does feel like you're on a competitive live sports team, but you're sitting there coordinating a highly technical, highly produced show that sometimes has tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people watching all at once. It's crazy.
Nothing's more terrifying than the front page of Twitch for a giant client, and you're like, I am going to screw up everything.
Everybody wants to be the front page of Twitch until you're on the front page of Twitch and something breaks. it's a bad
This
time.
past weekend, can confirm.
Liam has been there. Liam knows. I think that highlights something that I think is really important that didn't get mentioned here, is like learning how to adapt on the fly and not lose your composure when things get tough is very important to working in broadcast. Whether you're on the camera, whether you're behind the scenes, you can't lose your crap because something fell apart. You got to be able to take a deep breath and figure out how to fix it on the fly. Sam did a great job with that with one of our Halo events where we were in a live studio and the entire broadcast just died. And they tried to restart it like 6 times. It wouldn't go up and it was rough. But he and the team sat there in the room. They figured it out and they sorted out a solution. And you make it work.
I would like to preface that was not my fault. That was an environmental issue that the static electricity built up on the carpets on the floor, and I did not foresee this, and then the PC fried, and I remember literally sitting there and be like, that was our main PC. I had to build this show incredibly lean. Guys, how do you want to do this? There was a metaphor that I used with Brendan a while back that like at its core there's some very important parts about broadcast, and you kind of build it like this like jawbreaker, where it's like at your very center is like everything that is absolutely essential to the broadcast, things that cannot break. And that's usually stuff like the encoder, and it's like you can never go offline on stream. Like you have to make sure the stream is always going in some way, even if it's like even if it's just a be right back screen with no music, the show must go on. And then you kind of start building these like insulary layers around it of like, okay, cool, like here's the next level. Like, okay, what if we had like the casters here, and what happens if one of the casters disconnects? It's like, okay, the show can still go on if like one of the 3 casters disconnects. That's fine. And then the next layer from there is like, okay, what happens if the overlays fail? Okay, we can reset the overlays. We can cut to casters for a second. And you just have a lot of these like layers in that like jawbreaker that you can kind of melt down before it gets to the critical phase. And as long as you protect it from reaching that critical phase, you're in a good place.
Really good way to put it. That's, yeah, I think you once told me you need redundancies for your redundancies, and that's how you keep a show going. Before I throw another question at you, Majestic in the chat, this is a surprisingly loaded question. Do you think COVID helped the esports community, and if so, how? I guess if not, how? I will also add that
I can answer
clarifier.
this one.
I think Sam really wants
I
to
love this
answer
answer.
this.
I thought about this a lot because, like I said, though, I came into this from the whole business analytics side of it, and it's interesting to me because of esports. Kind of, it didn't get hurt or it didn't get helped. It just changed because the focus beforehand was like sponsorship on like these dollars of like, now we're going to fill out an LCS studio, it's going to get big and it's going to be awesome. And you can see examples of like the Overwatch League was about to like quote unquote blow up and create this international or this national tour of these teams roaming around, and that was kind of the model, like to mimic traditional sports. And then COVID comes around, blows everything up. These live events can't happen anymore, and everyone's kind of sitting here with their hands tied and they don't know what to do. And so people started to really think that by like I think it was like the 6th or 8th month after the COVID stuff had kind of settled down and like lockdown was just kind of in effect and we all got used to it, is the people started to realize esports is uniquely positioned that COVID actually benefits us. All of our viewership that was from like traditional sports that can't happen anymore. People can play from their bedrooms. We can do this entire thing digitally. We don't have to do this in a studio. And it kind of shifted the perspective and shifted the thought process of how esports is done. And we're starting to see a return over the last year back to that live event. But with the recession kind of on the horizon as well, people are realizing that there's a lot of efficiencies and a lot of cheaper methods to kind of reach similar KPIs that you could do key performance indicators before you could do live events, and you can do it for like a third of the price. And so it's interesting to see this mentality shift and who's really stuck around from the COVID days and who hasn't, and who's just trying to keep forcing sports models into esports, and who's actually really like thinks about esports as a business compared to as a unique business and not just sports by another name.
Well, Ashcon, Liam, anything else you'd like to add from your own perspectives? I know you have. No, that was good. That was a great answer. I think part of the value here is that all three of you guys actually have very different experiences with how COVID and esports interacted. I'd love to hear Liam or Ashcon, either of your thoughts on that question.
I'll give it a go. I think I definitely echo the sentiment that it's like it changed esports, right? And I think that we could theoretically assign like a positive or a negative value to that change. I think it's hard to argue that it's not a negative change when we're seeing the levels of layoffs and reduction that we are, but there is like reason for that reduction, and I think Sam explained that well. When people start to think about these changes and how the demand of different content, tournaments, engagement, companies are going to make changes. I think during COVID, we saw a lot of injection of money that was targeted at this inflated viewership. We are seeing trends that kind of indicate we're in a decline in those viewership numbers, which are so big for advertisers and sponsors.
That's because we saw a giant boon during COVID. So it's a course correction to the regular
That's what I'm saying.
Was. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But that is a change, and we're seeing that correction. Although it's returning to what it was pre-COVID, obviously industries have ebbs and flows, and I think we're in the process of seeing one very large ebb for esports. So it's, especially with so many people that you personally know, and so many talented individuals losing their foothold in this industry, it's tough to say that it could potentially be a positive change. But I think out of everything, there's also positive effects that this correction will see. I think that moving forward, we're going to see a lot more authentic engagement with our communities. And for esports, I think that that's something that also really changed during COVID. with the lack of in-person events, it was harder to intimately connect with your audiences. And now that we're able to, resume in-person live events, we're seeing a lot more focus on the authenticity of these events and engaging with communities in meaningful ways, which I think a lot of that money injection kind of clouded during COVID. But for me, I think it's a net negative because we're seeing so much hardship on the individual people level of our industry. There's so many people, so much talent that might be considering leaving this industry or are, struggling personally to provide for themselves because of the changes in this industry. But I think in the long term that this is a healthy correction for our space, and those who stay committed and, continue to find value and find jobs in this space will see some positive stuff at the end of it.
Well said. Go ahead, Ashkan.
I think I am very much on the same page as Liam, where long term, I think that there will be a better future and a better outlook for esports, but we're obviously seeing a lot of the negative effects of these short term changes. Even just today, we saw 2 orgs exit the LCS for League of Legends, and that's some, pretty sad news in the short term. But the way I see it is like a natural forest fire. If you guys have ever gone to like a national park and go on those tours and they talk to you about like the cycle of forest fires, things are going to burn, but it's a controlled burn, and they will, come back, regrow a lot stronger. And over the course of that time, there will be a lot of damage, and we're going to have to kind of find a way as individuals to navigate that. And it is a lot harder than it sounds, by the way. But it's something that, if you love the scene, then you're going to have to figure that through. And hopefully long term, those structures will come back into place in a more stable iteration. Is most definitely the hope. And that's what we've been seeing out of these leagues as well. If we're going to continue on to the example of Riot Games, that they want to see these orgs that are participating, because they really do compose a larger part of their ecosystem. They want to see those come back in a more solid fashion as well.
That was a good answer. I agree with a lot of what you guys said. I think I like to stick to the phrase of like a rising tide lifts all ships in a lot of ways, and that is true a lot of the time. But with esports, we've seen a funny situation where a lot of ships got lifted and a lot of money came in, and then we've kind of had this retraction essentially to adapt to making sure that people can actually make their money. And I like to believe that in this industry, there's enough people who are passionate about it and see the vision and want to see everything succeed that they will work to help ensure longevity for this industry. And this is a conversation we could spend hours on. I have more questions for you guys, but we're getting more questions from Majestic here, and I'd rather spend our time on the folks who are here and engaging. And once again, well thought out, loaded question. Holy cow. How lucrative is the esports sector? Do you think it will grow? And if it does, how will esports change again and grow in the next generation? That's like an hour-long answer, but I'm going to see what these guys can do with it in the time that we have. I think Ashkan raised his hand. It sounds like you want to go first.
Yeah, so I would say it depends on where you are and who you are. Is the best answer to that question. If you're coming in, you know the right people, and you're in the right places, sure, it could be pretty lucrative as an individual. For a company as a whole, the large consensus that I understand is it's really hard to monetize in esports. It's really hard to generate revenue, and that is what's haunting organizations. So it is conditional if you're an individual, difficult as an organization. Now, whether it will grow, I definitely see esports growing. I think Riot Games just released the report that Worlds broke its viewership record this year. So things like that are showing that people are interested in esports. It's a matter of, okay, well, great, people are interested in esports. They're consuming our media. They're really enjoying engaging with us, but how are we going to make money off of them? And that's going to be the big if question. And with that, I'll pass it over to any of the other guys.
Oh boy. There's 2 different paths moving forward that I see. There's the original was kind of like esports kind of went through this whole phase of basically focusing on how can we generate revenue that is adjacent to gaming. And it was like all of these like 100 Thieves took this approach of like building a game studio. TSM was doing ads and like building a lot of like the mobalytics and like a lot of the guides and some of the stuff that hits the average player. All of these orgs were kind of doing things that were next to esports, but weren't really esports, if that makes sense. It's not like you're seeing like the Mavericks getting into producing basketballs. But that's what we were seeing in esports all the time, and it didn't line up. Now that we see this kind of course correction, some of those like other agencies have either kind of broken off and realized that esports is kind of a money pit and it's not a money generator, and said, you know what, screw it, let's just take our company separate and we can all get paid more. Like, what's the point of being attached to this esports org now? So moving forward, there's basically two approaches, and it's kind of unfortunate that esports had a similar rise at the same time that the creator economy had, because the two compete for viewers significantly. And it's just now that organizations like Riot are starting to realize that, like, what if we just had these watch parties? And it's like all of a sudden, like, Tarek is getting more viewers than freaking VCT broadcasts, or like Disguised Toast getting into like LCS and all the TFT games. He's getting more viewers than the entirety of like their year of streams in one stream. So it's like people are starting to come around and realize that like content creators kind of drive this, because at the end of the day, esports is just marketing. It is a matter of pushing a product out there, getting eyeballs, and making sure that people buy that product in some sense. And that's why the broadcast side of this is so important, because that's where you figure out where the eyeballs are. And it's like you can do something as janky as what DSG did, of like just hand-drawn DSG, and it sells. Like, it doesn't have to be the most published or polished thing in the world, and it's a matter of not creating drama, that's a bad way of phrasing it, but creating fun interactions with your fans that keep people captivated and wanting to come back and find out more. And the second route, that's kind of the one branch of like the content creators and esports merging with content creators. And the second one is more professional esports teams get better payouts from the publishers themselves. Because at the top, the problem is the publishers control all of the money. Like, they are the ones that are actually making the money, because you are marketing League of Legends at its core. And so you are marketing them buying a skin. So that's basically what the product you are selling is when you have an LCS team. Sure, there's merch and sure, there's all this other stuff, but ultimately they compete in the LCS, and the LCS's whole motivation is to sell League of Legends. So you're kind of just a part of the greater machine. You're a cog in the wheel that isn't really getting paid out as much as you should. And this is kind of goes back to like, it's interesting where it's like the other alternative is just publishers actually pay the teams their share or their fair share, and it kind of goes under this like socialist mindset of, I'm going to get the money at the top, this is a pool that is coming out as Riot Games, now we're going to pay it back to the organizations. Oh, those skins that you sold that have your brand on it, oh, you actually want that money now? Yeah, I guess we can pay that to you. Like so there's two routes, it's the creators and the publishers, and that's my spiel.
Well
I
put.
think I carry a lot of the same sentiment as Sam. I think that esports itself is not incredibly lucrative, right? And I think the current status of our industry shows that, right? There's very few esports orgs who are turning a profit, and those who are usually have other revenue generating engines that are, you know, esports parallel, but inherently are not esports. Like, that's just the industry that their chosen engine is applied to. We see a lot of that in esports now. You know, I work for SSG, but I'm not involved with our esports team, for example. You know, I do revenue generating shows where you sell, you know, tournaments, broadcast events to clients, and in turn we generate revenue for our team that way. That's not inherently esports to me, right? I think the biggest problem we see in esports is that there's very few options for monetization. When you look at the monetization of sports, it's often the most compared to thing for esports. There's pay-per-view, there's, you know, coliseums. While we are seeing the rise of that, especially in the EU, with certain teams building out esports specific spaces, coliseums are a huge thing. And how they run, you know, the NFL, how they run their franchises, and how teams generate revenue off of ad deals and jerseys and merchandise. We don't necessarily see that as largely in esports. There's definitely a split mentality, I think, among a lot of people who engage with esports, where some people wouldn't mind, being on a pay-per-view model, but there's some people who definitely want to continue esports being accessible like it is now. And I'm kind of on the fence. I don't, in terms of authenticity, I think it's good to have accessibility because you can get as many people out to these things and it's the best way to engage with your fans. But on the same time, how are we going to be sustainable long term if we're not, generating revenue in a pretty efficient way? And it's standard in other industries. Why can't it be standard here? That's the great debate, I think, that weighs a lot on how lucrative esports actually is. And so I think it comes down realistically to who holds the rights for tournaments and leagues and all that kind of stuff. And right now, just as Sam said, it's a publisher thing. So as publishers get involved on the level that Riot is, I think Riot, in terms of publishers, is a pretty gold standard for how people are running esports scenes. I think Rocket League for me is a close second. We're going to see a lot of ideas and minds change as those companies approach the topic of profitability and what esports means for them and what kind of return they're getting out of it. Most of esports, I think, right now is taking the shift of using esports as a marketing vehicle for other things. But the focus there is still to do authentic, engaging things, right? It's a vital part of several ecosystems. And I think that when several ecosystems exist like that, you're always going to have one that's not necessarily profitable, but it's driving revenue to your other engines. And that might be where we see esports for the significant future.
If esports can solve the problem of getting higher viewership than some mommy YouTube channel, like, then we're set. But until that happens, people are going to go where the eyeballs are in terms of like revenue and eyeball or like ad sponsors. So we have to figure out how to either organically grow our scene like the FGC has been doing, or do we want to take another all-in risk like we did with Overwatch League? And I think there's a lot in the middle, don't get me wrong, but it's interesting to see the two spectrums and how they've kind of collided, clashed, and grown next to one another.
It's a really interesting one. And I think you guys all gave really interesting, varied answers here because at the end of the day, esports isn't one singular thing. I mean, even Riot is experimenting with how they do esports for different titles. And the different forms of monetization are really important. But a lot of times, I and a lot of other people point back to the fact that as it stands, watching esports is free. And in the traditional sports world, you pay for it. There's not much free sports out there, even going to your local college basketball game. What, Sam?
But do you know why that is, though?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I have a guess, but I want to hear what you have to say.
It's because in traditional sports, one, no one owns the game. Two, there are media buy-ins
True.
for them. Like in the example, like WWE, Fox buys WWE's broadcast, and then they have to make money back on the purchases for it. There is nothing at the top for esports right now. Nothing. No one is buying this content because the world's just getting it for free. And the one time that they tried to do it payment, like LCS ProView, it just collapsed, and it made I think nothing. It made almost nothing. I think it was like close to 1,000 users one quarter. Like what?
All I will say is, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, in terms of monetization, we're going to see a lot of experimenting. Because the media rights hole exists, I know companies that do esports right now are going to be starting to test how they can monetize without gating esports behind a paywall. Anyway, we have a question from Twitch chat in here that I want to take real quick because we've been fantastic questions. We've been rocking with you for a minute. Crossed RL asked, do you think college esports will grow? And I think that's a tricky one because it's multifaceted. Personally, I think so. Yes. I mean, just today, there was a clip bouncing around from the Pat McAfee show talking about West Virginia University's Rocket League team and how awesome they are. And he's like a sports icon. So seeing that it's out there and people are working to grow it, I'm personal friends with the director of the esports program here at the University of Oregon. He's a great guy. A lot of people fighting for it, but I think the growth of collegiate is somewhat dependent on the interaction with the NCAA and how individual schools support them, because whether they end up under student life or under athletics makes a very big difference about their potential to grow. That's my spiel.
I'm going to steal the mic there
think-
again because.
I think the
Oh, sorry,
TLDR
Leo.
that. Mine's quick. I was just gonna say I think collegiate is always going to continue to grow. Like we talked about earlier with esports being a free viewing experience, gaming is very much accessible to a lot of people. And as our society grows more technology inclined, I think that the prevalence or how common esports and gaming is will only grow. And thus there will be demand for communities where people can engage with like-minded things. And college is one of those places where people are more than, more often than not, trying to find others like-minded. You're always going to see growth there, I think, especially in the size of collegiate. We see still a lot of campuses getting involved, building out facilities. I think that there might be a stage where that terms of university support and what does an arena look like, what kind of base support should a college offer, I think we might see that plateau a little bit. But in terms of how many people are engaging with collegiate esports and how much is going on in collegiate esports, I think it's always going to grow.
Can I interject and play devil's advocate for a second? So the problem
Sure.
that I've always had with this is that, yes, esports will continue to grow on the collegiate level. Yes, the quote unquote tribalism is fantastic. Like if you're a UF Gator, you can get alumni dating or donating back to the club in some sense or another. But I think on the greater scheme of the US economy in general, and I think college is starting to see a decline in admittance over the last couple of years, especially during COVID. I think collegiate esports is not where we're going to see the major amount of growth. I think it's where we're going to see a major amount of investment, sure, but I think the investment is going to be for naught. I think you're spot on like building the studios and the stadiums and everything like this, and I think collegiate will continue to see investment, and we will always start to see more standardization of teams across the board, and people will start to receive scholarships, and we've already seen like a good amount of schools already give scholarships for it, but none of them have ever kind of reached that level of like full ride that like traditional sports has. And I think it goes back to this previous question of what we're having of just revenue problems within esports. If they can't even generate revenue on like for ads and stuff like that, how are college teams supposed to basically get this like next level of money, especially when there's no one buying it? That's where like the Pac-12 and the NCAA makes the majority of their money in selling their rights to a media buy-in. And no one wants to buy the rights to esports right now. We saw a couple of experimentations with ESPN2 with like Heroes of the Dorm way back when, but even then that couldn't sustain itself after 2 or 3 years of that. So collegiate, I have a special hole in my heart for it. I love it with a fiery passion, but I think it's a retirement ground more than it is the future of esports.
I'll pick it up from there. Real quick, I saw a question about going into communication studies in college, and I want to say that it has been very much worthwhile. It's me. I'm the communication studies major that is also a caster. So I highly encourage you guys that if you want to go into broadcasting, communication studies is a great way to do it. If your school has a CTVA program as well, those are also amazing degrees to pick up. Don't shy away from it. I will say though, if you end up going into the field first and then going into your higher level classes, you may feel a little bit ahead of the curve, but that's never a bad thing when you're going into academics. So, hey, take it where you can get it. But onto the topic of college esports growing, as a campus leader at Cal State Northridge, anything that is under student management is an uphill battle because you're basically working with volunteers. So even structurally, when it comes to each individual campus, it depends on where they're categorized. So on the West Coast, we're having a lot of those student-run programs, and we're seeing difficulties organizing in an intercollegiate manner without the help of third parties. And of course, those third parties want to have their hand in the cookie jar to get something out of it, which makes sense, but it does in some ways diminish the capabilities of what these schools are able to do together, because now they have to go through a third party that's helping them as opposed to working across the campuses, because these campuses are of course already familiar with working with each other. And this is unfortunately due to a lack of administrative support. Schools like UCLA, USC, Berkeley, they're already famous schools. They don't feel the need to begin recruiting through esports because they know that they have enough admissions as it is for them. So they're more than fine. On the East Coast, we're seeing a lot of these private schools use the money from their private tuitions to fund scholarships, and that's kind of how they're using esports to market their campus. So again, in the same way that developers are marketing their product, schools are marketing their campus through the use of scholarships, and so that's kind of where the relationship is at. And it's coming down to whether or not these campuses can centralize and whether we can push through administration at a national level to maybe come under a unified body. And that will, of course, end up with something like the National Sports Association, the NCAA, is coming through. So that's the way I see it personally. But
Yeah, but do we want those NCAA guys in our esports? I don't know about that. I like my name, image, likeness.
fair.
Congratulations, CrossRL. You've sparked a hotly debated topic that I know these guys have a lot of passion for. We're gonna do like 2 more questions, and we'll let people get on with the evening. This is great, though. I want to say thank you to everyone who's been asking questions and engaging. This is part of what makes it fun for us because we're not too far off from where you guys are right now, and it's fun to be able to kind of share what we've learned in the process and have a discussion about this stuff. So on that note, the next question, I believe, is from CrossRL. This one I actually don't know how to answer. How do colleges find players to offer scholarships to? Do they go to events to scout players? Sounds like Ashcon knows.
Well, I want to pass the mic to anyone else first, if anyone else wants it. No? Okay, I'll take it.
Uh,
Oh, Liam, go.
well, I'll say something. I do know that high school esports is definitely growing, right? I think Ken Garf is proof of that. And there are certain organizations who are committed to developing that talent pipeline for collegiate. I think that every college you interact with is going to be different in how they scout players. I think that some are purely going to go, to the professional level, and they're going to look like normal esports orgs who are scouting people with high skills like floors who still have room to grow, who are coachable, who fit their culture well. And I think that there are some who will host on campus basically auditions, tryouts, and they'll find players that way. But I do think that there is a growing space. I believe their name is Spin. I don't remember what it stands for. Stay plugged in, maybe. And they've been hosting a platform where basically think of it as almost like a combine. So they kind of track and connect people to colleges. Some colleges pay to access those contacts with different players, and it's a way for high school esports programs to kind of promote their players and kind of get them a leg up in those negotiations. Now you have a direct connect to these people who are getting direct eyes on you and engaging with you to talk about your future with their program. And so I think that those kinds of options are opening it up for collegiate players or high school players looking to go to collegiate. But I think at the top end of competitive collegiate, we're still seeing very much a tradition follow for normal esports where people are looking for the people who are making flashy plays, who are being well known, that kind of deal. So a lot of them are scouting based on online leagues that happen throughout the year. I think it's very rare to see collegiate directors going to large events. There may be some, they may use DreamHack as like potential scouting grounds, very, very rarely, I think. But as we're kind of returning to a live event environment, I think you might see more directors going and scouting people at larger lands. For example, you might see some at the spring celebration for the Ken Garf League. We don't know yet. When you have large environments like that are publicly accessible, I think it's always an option, but I don't know if it's necessarily a priority for a lot of directors who are recruiting.
Well
I
said.
will touch on that definitely even the schools that are investing into esports, their budget for esports is a certain amount, right? And so the extra travel costs for in-person lands are something that they are trying to avoid when they can, unless it's absolutely necessary or something that they're very, very much interested in. Online tournaments, I think, are the best way to go for now. There are, like Liam did mention Spin, there are platforms that are coming around to capitalize off of that interest. But if you're trying to go to a college that's offering scholarship, you have to know, first of all, that they're trying to take up the top 1% of players in the game, whatever game it is that you're playing. It doesn't matter if it's Rocket League, Valorant, Counter-Strike, COD, Smash Brothers, whatever it is that you want to play. If they're paying out money in terms of scholarship, they're looking for that level of play at minimum, right? So with that in mind, you need to be at that level of play, competing in tournaments as much as you can online, and kind of compiling your results or your participation. Uh, Specifically in the Valorant scene, what a lot of teams have been doing is making what they call project rosters. They'll compete in a few tournaments, get some placements, and then they'll have like a little resume of sorts, and then they can show that to potential recruiters. Getting in touch with recruiters on your own is also something that you want to consider, whether or not you go through the tournaments on your own. And the way you can do that is really simple. If you have a program in mind, which you should, you want to go ahead and take a look at each of these schools, their campuses, what it is that interests you, and then go to your academic advisement counselor. If you don't currently have one, then get in touch with one. I'm pretty sure every single high school has one, so you guys can decide your electives and whatnot in your later years. And you can ask them to find you the contacts. Now, depending on how familiar your advisor is with esports, they may not be able to touch base themselves, but being the hand that reaches out and asking, hey, how can I be involved with tryouts or getting onto the roster, is definitely a great way to put yourself out there as well. Because not only are these programs looking for students that are talented in their game, they're looking for students that are great communicators and a great culture fit for their school. And being an outgoing force in pursuing your own esports career is definitely going to help you in that endeavor. 100%.
That's so cool. None of that stuff was around when I went to college.
Seriously. Well, it's glad to see that even just a few short years, things have progressed well. And Twitch chat Crossed, who asked about some of these things, said, "I'm looking to take my game to college after we win Rocket League at the spring celebration this year." Best of luck. We're excited to see it. We are going to close it out here. Some final statements. I'm going to let each of these guys close out with whatever advice they would give to their younger selves if they were in your position in high school right now. Figuring it out can be short and sweet. Doesn't need to be wildly complex. But if you could recommend something that you would share with your younger self, what would that be? Ashcon, I'll let you go first. You've been having lots of fun.
I would say remain sure of your step even through failure. If you find yourself hitting a wall, don't go insane, but make a good attempt at things before you turn around and walk the other way.
That's a good one.
Mm,
Henry, next.
me
Try to
over.
keep it positive.
Yeah, me trying not to make it bash school or esport. Yeah, I'm gonna echo what Ashcon said real fast. It's basically stick to your commitments. Stick to your guns. Normally, stick to your guns, but be receptive for feedback. There's so many times in my past where I have just doubted myself, and I wish I would have stuck to that path and just been braver and bolder. Especially with my family. There's a lot of times in esports where it's kind of this new emerging thing, and your parents won't believe in you, and that's a very difficult thing. And yeah, stick to your guns, believe in yourself, find friends who will support you, and be courageous and make steps in the right direction.
Liam, what you got?
I think mine echoes the same thing. Find some conviction in yourself. I think it's very difficult, especially when you're younger, to think about what the hell you're going to be doing in 25 years, right? Or even shorter than that. Like, what does the next 3 years, 5 years look like? That's always so hard to tackle, especially at a younger age. And I think that you're in a spot, luckily, where you're flexible, right? I talked about how I didn't really plan on being in broadcast, but here I am, and I absolutely enjoy it. So I think set some goals for yourself, and they can be super broad, right? One motto or goal that I have set for myself and have stuck to for the past 6 years has been do cool things. And cool, like, what the hell does that mean, right? What's cool to you? Don't go chasing after what you think is cool for other people. Do what you believe in, stick to those guidelines you set for yourself, and I think you will be much more happy with where you are in life and with what you're doing than a lot of other people. Because I think, especially in our society nowadays, it's really easy to compare yourself to other people. It's very easy to see what other people are doing and think that that might be the right answer, or see that one really successful person on social media and think that you're behind. But everyone has their own timeline. You're not ahead, you're not behind, you are perfectly on track. Kind of steel yourself in those goals, keep them close to yourself, and I think that you'll be on the right path.
The only person you should compare yourself to is your past self.
Yeah.
True.
I'm going to go a slightly different direction for our friends watching, because I feel like I have my own spin on this. But I think it's important to remind people who are going into the early stages of adult life that you have time, and what you think you're going to end up doing in 30 years, I promise you, it's probably going to change. What I thought I was going to be doing 5 years ago changed. And it's scary, but getting used to that being scary is okay. And I think our society does a good job of convincing you that you got to have it all figured out and make $1 million by 25. And if you don't, you're a failure. And that's just not true. I mean, people find, like, Stan Lee wrote the first Fantastic Four comment at 40. Henry Ford started the Ford Motor Company at 40 years old. You do not have to have it all figured out. You don't need a full career, and you don't need to be 100% sure that what you're doing is for the rest of your life. The best thing you can do is find things that interest you and that you're passionate about and chase them. And by doing them, you will figure out some that you like and some that you don't. And over time, you're going to figure it out. But I think the key is that you need to commit to yourself, and you need to continue pushing ahead. The day you stop trying and you stop chasing what you're passionate about is the day that you're going to make your life a lot harder. So all I can say is remember that you have time. Don't put pressure on yourselves to know exactly what you want to do in esports or in broadcast or in life within the next 5 years. But push yourself to try new things. If they seem interesting, if they seem fun, if someone gives you an opportunity, take it and go with it. Because, like we've all said today, you might end up doing something you enjoy that you didn't intend on doing. So that is my little tidbit. I appreciate you guys hanging out today. Thank you for asking so many great questions. We really, really appreciate it, because it's not as fun talking to a brick wall. We love when people get excited about this and actually want to ask us questions. I don't know if we're experts, but we're happy to share what we have. So thank you guys for being here and sharing your evening with us. We hope you all take care and have a happy holidays. Thank you guys for being here, Sam, Ashkan, and Liam as well.
And
Yay.
All
Good job,
right.
guys. Thank you for all the great answers.
GG. All right.
Alrighty. Bye, guys.
See ya.